Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you that for updates on the show, be sure to follow me on Twitter at OmerQ_. Again, that's at OMERQ_. And if you like the show, please consider supporting it by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or following the show on Spotify so that you get notified when a new episode is released. Also, be sure to send it to your friends. We don't ask you to give us money, just support the show by helping it grow. Just a few easy clicks. That's all it takes. It doesn't cost you a dime, and you can do it in no time. So please consider doing that, and let's get to the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, we're going to be talking about the impact of the entertainment industry on politics and third parties and their role in this presidential election. And joining me to do that is a leftist activist, Francesco DeSantis. Francesco, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm all right. Let's just get started because it's a very interesting topic that I don't think a lot of people know a lot about. The entertainment industry and politics seem to have a lot of overlap, and that's something that you, I know, have a lot of familiarity with. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So a little bit about my background and my expertise on this. I'm from Los Angeles. Basically my entire family works in the entertainment industry in different capacities. That ranges from unscripted like reality TV to documentary to television to film, etc. My sister's in the music business. But I think what people outside of Hollywood, right, kind of forget is that like the entertainment industry, despite all its mystique, despite all of its glamour, right, it's still big business, you know? So like all big business, it's been extremely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And there have been a lot of impacts throughout the industry and throughout the economy as a result of that, right? So one thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that, so at the beginning of the pandemic, when corporations were highly invested in this messaging strategy of we're all in this together, we're all going to have to take a cut in order to get through it, blah, 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 right? Disney cutting away and shuttered the parks. Now, most recently, they have laid off 28,000 people.
Yeah, I actually
in an effort.
I had Jamie Fortin on last week, and she used to work at Disney, and she told me that it's affecting people she knows, and it's actually really scummy what they're doing.
Well, it's completely scummy, and they're cutting all those jobs. And what are they doing with that money that they freed up? They're restoring executive pay to pre-COVID levels. Right. That's really what it comes down to. And you see this trend throughout the entertainment industry. Another example I have of it right here is UTA, the United Talent Agency, which is one of the major talent agencies in Hollywood. That along with CAA. Right. They're obviously a much smaller company than Disney, about 50 people. And what do they do with that money that they freed up? They hired Rich Paul. They put him on the board of directors of the company, So I think that these go to show that the entertainment industry is under the same pressures and same trends as basically the rest of the economy, and they're doing the same thing to deal with it, which is cut jobs and keep high level pay at the same level as much as they possibly can. And this is a long trend with Disney, right? Disney is an extremely powerful corporation.
They're a conglomerate. They're not even a corporation, just a corporation anymore. They're a whole conglomerate.
Absolutely.
They own Fox, they own ESPN, like ABC. They own Mickey Mouse and Tucker Carlson. That is a major accomplishment in my opinion. But
they own Star Wars, they own Marvel, they own Pixar. You know what I mean? The mega franchises. No one compares to Disney in terms of entertainment company. And that also has like the impact on the ground, right? Like Disneyland and Disney World are massive economic in their respective local and state politics, right? A famous story out of Anaheim, right, was that the city council of Anaheim tried to raise the minimum wage. Disney could not abide by it because that would be cut into their bottom line in a tremendous way. If you raise the minimum in Anaheim, that's all Disney workers in Disneyland. Not so. First, Disney pressured the city council to grant them an exemption from the minimum wage hike right? Which they did, and Disney still and they eventually killed it. So because Disneyland didn't their workers more, right? They took that off the table for the entire city of Anaheim. Just tremendous amount of power for one corporation in one place, right? But the same is true in Florida. I mean, I'm not talking about statewide minimum wage hike. I don't think they've even proposed that in Florida in years.
I don't see that happening anytime soon.
But the bottom line is Disney gets what they want. There are famous examples like the way law works in this country is it's the creator's lifespan plus it used to be, I think, 50 years. And basically, whenever Disney properties are up for the copyright expiry, send those intellectual property into public domain, basically make them unprofitable for Disney, they go to bat and say, oh no, we want it 70 years, we want it 90 years, we want it 120 years. And they just keep doing that. And, that's one thing for Disney, but it has, again, ripple effects throughout the economy. It means that the whole copyright system, right, is basically beholden to Disney, following the trends of Disney. Mm-hmm. It makes it so things can't enter the public domain, for 2-3 times as long as it used to be. And that hinders creativity, right? That hinders the ability to make new intellectual property based on these existing things, right? You think of like these great movies from the past, Dracula versus Billy the Kid, you know what I mean? Right. And the reason that those things are able to exist because those enter the public domain at a certain point. Sherlock Holmes just entered the public domain. Sherlock Holmes. Think about how long Sherlock Holmes was created. And still, the family of Arthur Conan Doyle is like clinging to that and claiming all kinds of nonsense to try to extend the copyright. But that's what it comes down to. It's like the way that they're able to do that is basically through Disney and their massive power. Right. And then the other thing is like, all right, so throughout the pandemic, there have been winners and losers, right? The Disney parks, for instance, and Disney theatrical releases have taken a serious hit. That's true. Mm-hmm. Even though they basically were granted license to reopen, and that was a massive disaster, whatever. The real winners, though, are the streaming companies, right?
Yes.
Because they have, having worked on a Netflix show, like we made that show in like 2017, you know what I mean? It aired in like 2019. They have the production schedule in the can years in advance, that's really the biggest hit in terms of actual like Hollywood, not just at the corporate level, but at the kind of level of in people's jobs, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is people can't get financing and can't shoot, right? You can't have a production crew, all the people needed for that inside in doing this work, right? Which even if you try to do it with like an extremely lean production crew, you're talking about massive delays, which costs a lot of money, So the winners, right, are companies like Netflix or Amazon Prime, which doesn't need any more fucking money,
Not at all. Happy Prime Day, by the way.
Thank you very much. Again, if you look at the ripple effects that this is having on the economy, they're pretty massive, right? You look at something like movie theaters, which movie theaters have for the last few years been called mall anchors, right? They're really some of the only businesses that are keeping like malls open at all, right?
Yeah. It's like that. It's like them and like maybe Macy's, or not even them anymore because everything's just delivery now. So it's you're right.
The department stores are shuttering. Didn't Sears go under? And
JCPenney as well.
JCPenney, yeah, exactly. And like just small retail stores, they can't compete with the online shopping surge. Movie theaters as like something that you kind of have to go to and experience.
It's an activity. It's like activity. Something. Yeah, it's something you are like. You're able to take your group out and say, "Hey, let's go to the movies. Let's go do that." That's really the only appeal of going to malls anymore. I think you're right.
Exactly.
The only other experience like in a mall that you can probably equate that to somewhat is like going to a restaurant or a bar to watch a game. Otherwise, there's really no reason to go shopping There's no reason to go do any of that, right? And I think that's what's really hurt a lot of people in this new economy. I don't think the problem is that it happened. The problem is that it happened and the American government and the American leadership and, you know, all these people, all these corporations didn't do anything to help make up that economic loss for those communities.
Absolutely.
And you have these corporations or, you know, these very conventional American free market capitalists who say that it's the people's fault. It's their fault for not adapting to this new environment, when the reality is a lot of these business owners, like my parents owned a small business for decades in Maryland, and it's very difficult to just uproot everything that, you know, you kind of know and the way you know how to do business overnight, because the shift towards Amazon and a lot of these online shopping mediums, they happened very quickly. You know, it's like 2016, yeah, you were shopping on Amazon, but by 2018, it was like Amazon Prime 2-day delivery hit, and you were just ordering like crazy. And like on top of that, they don't realize the expenses that go into actually, you know, making your own website or, you know, selling stuff online. These are investments people have to make, and a lot of people who are either starting their business or who even have their business and they're starting to take a downturn, it's really difficult for them to be able to afford that. So that's why I've always had a huge problem with this approach that blaming the people and not blaming the industry or blaming the monopoly of Amazon for really changing the way that we do business. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying what they did specifically was wrong. I'm saying the way that they did it, the way that they handled it, by not helping make up that ground and by paying $0 in taxes for even, you know, not even contributing anything really. They just kind of did their own thing and got away with it. It's affected millions of people in this country. It's affected thousands of small business owners in this country who are now out of business because of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a capitalist, but that's capitalism. That is capitalism, right? Like creative destruction. That is an integral part of capitalism, especially the like technological aspect, right? And you know, you look at all kinds of sectors that have been disrupted, right, quote unquote, by technology, and you know, at the end of the day, they are still killing jobs, right? And they're especially are killing good paying jobs. Look at Uber as opposed to the taxi industry, where like in New York, the taxi industry was unionized, is unionized, right? That is a like career job that, you know, you actually get benefits and decent pay for. You know, being an Uber driver, you don't get any of that. In California, a judge ruled that Uber had to classify their employees as opposed to contractors, and the Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash have so far spent about $185 million on Section 22, which would overturn that ruling. It would, yes, on Prop 22 means you know, exempting those companies from classifying their employees as employees, but that's true of so many of these technologically disrupted sectors where they claim that they're creating jobs, but the truth is they're not creating the same number of jobs or quality of jobs as these sectors previously created. And you know, so much of the time when they claim that they're automating the process, right, that's totally false, right? I don't know if you saw the story about Berkeley. They had these little like box robots drive around, and I don't even know what they did, like give you drinks or something. But the company claimed that they were automated. They're completely like self-driving autonomous vehicles, robots. Turns out being like piloted by like, you know, workers making like cents on their in, you know, Peru or something. You know what I mean? That's nothing. You know what I mean? That's neither, you know, a technological innovation. It's an RC car.
It's exploitation. That's what it is.
Totally. And to add insult to injury, right, with a company like Amazon, I don't know if you saw this, Amazon, like in Georgetown, there's one, Amazon bookstores, brick and mortar Amazon bookstores. You know what I mean? It's like you destroyed the like mom and pop bookstore industry, right? Whatever you want to call it. You know, that used to be a small business you could own, a bookstore, right? That doesn't exist anymore because of Amazon. And then you go and open a brick and mortar bookstore, you know, it's completely insulting. Right. And the same thing, well, just to finish this point, the same thing is now happening with movies, right? AMC, which obviously has not been able to weather this pandemic, is basically on the brink of closure and has been teetering there for a little while now. Amazon is trying to acquire AMC theaters, right, which would give them the largest theater chain in the country. And, you know, anti-monopoly rules, as though Amazon cares, anti-monopoly rules technically dictate that studios can't own theaters, right? Theater chains. That it makes sense, right? But we'll have to see how it shakes out. But I mean, it is ridiculous, you know what I mean, that they would be allowed to do that. And again, it's just insult to injury. You know, you destroy the sector and then you rebuild it in your own image without really any of the positive qualities that the sector had before, you know?
Yeah, and I think the argument that you'll get from a lot of, you know, people on the right, but more so, you know, even people on the left who blindly follow American capitalism, which in reality is corporatism. They'll say things like, well, Jeff Bezos worked extremely hard to build up Amazon, and he worked hard to acquire what he has. So, and because he has what he has, that gives him every right to acquire whatever he wants. He can, if he wants to go out and acquire AMC, nothing should restrict him from doing that. If he wants to go out there and acquire the Washington Post or the Newseum or whatever else Jeff Bezos wants to acquire, he can do that because he's worked for everything he's done. When if you really look at the reality of the situation, nobody ever gets that big on their own. Am I saying that Jeff Bezos didn't work hard? No, that's not what I'm saying. But it's not all built on Jeff Bezos. It's built on the backs of the workers who have built Amazon for Jeff Bezos. It's built on the backs of everyone that he stepped on. It's built on the backs of the bookstore industry, like you were talking about. How many Barnes and Nobles do you see out there nowadays? And, you know, and if the same thing happens to movie theaters, how many AMCs do you see? How many Cinemarks are you going to see in 10 years? So it's built on the backs of all these people who have been exploited and who have suffered because of this corporatism that exists in America. And again, I'm not arguing that, you know, capitalism all in itself is bad. But what I am saying is that there needs to be limits as to far as how far someone can go and what they're acquiring. Like you said, studios should not be able to own theaters for obvious reasons, because the theaters are going to very heavily promote one studio's specific, you know, type of movies or one studio's movies over the other. And they're going to essentially be just platforms for people to go see Amazon Prime movies, even though they only come out with like one every year. That's good. The problem is, I don't think you hear a lot of people really speak out against that, you know, especially in the entertainment industry. I'm surprised. Do you know if anyone in the entertainment industry has actually spoken about this specific issue?
Well, I mean, so a couple of things that I wanted to say about what you're saying, because I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And, you know, I mean, first, one thing I wanted to note is that Jeff Bezos also got like a $200,000 loan from his parents to start Amazon. You know what I mean? It's like not everyone could do that.
Yeah, small, big vibes of a small loan of $1 million.
Exactly. And, you know, I mean, on the left, right? If you buy into like the most basic, like whatever you want to call it, like all I'm trying to say is that, like, I believe in the labor theory of value, right? Labor creates value. And the base price of any good is the labor that goes into creating it. So the idea that, like, I think that needs to be kind of a much bigger, you know, reinvention of the way that we think about work in this country, right? I think that we have this idea that people like Jeff Bezos or, you know, Elon Musk or whatever, like they're you know, this singular capitalist who, you know, through their own hard work and them alone, right, create the value of their company, when in fact it is their workers who create the value of their company, you know? So I completely agree with you, and I think that needs to be a much bigger conversation. In terms of the entertainment industry, I think people are scrambling, right? Like I said, so many people are out of work. I think that the pandemic has really hit. When you think about the entertainment industry as like a relatively white collar industry, right? I think it's been hit much harder than a lot of other white collar industries by the pandemic, right? Because it does so much rely on in-person large group filming and things like this. You know, you can do editing theoretically, you know, over Zoom or whatever in your own home. You can, in other white collar professions, you can, you know, trade stocks or, you know, write comms plans or whatever you need to do from the comfort of your own home. That's really not the case when you're making a movie. You know,
it's more of a collaborative team effort. Like, you need everyone on site to be able to film, obviously. Right.
Yeah. So I think I truly do think that people are clinging to things that even are like bad ideas, like Quibi. Right?
Oh yes, Quibi.
It's very rare to hear anyone in the entertainment industry criticize anything else in the entertainment industry, because at the end of the day, they're trying to get hired, right? Jack Allison, who's this guy, very interesting leftist, he used to work for Jimmy Kimmel, like on his show. He wrote this great article about this insane fight that he got in with Michael Che, who's the head, I don't know if you know, is actually the head writer for SNL as well as one of the main cast members.
Yes.
And like, you know, SNL sucks. Like I'm a fan of SNL, like historically, but like it hasn't been funny in years. But no one will say that because the, you know, pinnacle really of any comedy writer's career would be writing for SNL, you know, than maybe being a cast member, right? So there's this kind of weird unspoken code of silence, right, around these kinds of things, where like you don't want to criticize Amazon because you want to end up with the Amazon Prime deal, you know.
And I think you kind of, and I think that kind of speaks to just power in general, and you know, these and institutions in general, because you see that in politics too. Like, whether or not, I know a lot of people who work in establishment, mainstream, Democratic and Republican politics. I know Republicans, lifelong Republicans, who I would consider very, you know, common sense people I can have a conversation with. You know, they're not people who are shouting from the rooftops, "Make America Great Again." But at the same time, they can't speak out against the president if they're working for Republicans publicly, right? Because of the power, you know, because it affects the way that they'll get hired in the future. It could affect the way that, you know, people look at them. Same thing in the Democratic Party. If you're trying to get a job in mainstream Democratic Party, in mainstream Democratic politics, you know, or a good job with a majority of the Democratic Party or in one of their offices, it would behoove you to not say anything critical of the establishment and not say anything overtly critical of the establishment leadership and how they're running things, even if that's the way you think. Because if you do, you run the risk of becoming blackballed. And, you know, people, the thing is, like, it's not, I think people kind of overlook this, or they don't take it as seriously as they should, because they think, oh, it's just these progressives who are complaining. But no, I mean, I've gone out and I've applied to a lot of Democratic jobs. I've applied to a lot of jobs, you know, in mainstream politics as well. And, you know, I'm a young kid. I'm a progressive, and I've, you know, said things critical. I've never been mean, or I've never been rude. I've always been real. I've always said things, you know, logical way. There's no real room to defend yourself. You're kind of stuck in this way of people thinking about you. And again, that's like leads to you being blackballed. That leads to you being seen as someone who could be a problem. And I think that's the problem with these institutions and these power structures in general, whether they be Amazon, whether they be mainstream political parties, whether they be Hollywood. All of these places want you to act as a cog in a machine. They don't want you to have any real ideas. They don't want you to be original. They don't want you to be really mindful of yourself or others. They want you to be mindful of them. And I think if you're trying to get, you know, a lot of people to buy into what you're selling, if you're one of those institutions, I think over time that's a pretty ineffective way to do it, because I'm someone who believes that over time people are gonna see past all of this BS. They're gonna see past Amazon, you know, saying, look at how good we treat our workers, when the exploitation they'll see past all of this, you know, pandering and all of this, all of these things they do to cover up their exploitation, and through that something better will come. The issue is that right now the power is so concentrated in these places. It's hard for a lot of these voices to be heard. And I think in order to do that, that's why it's important to have, to be mindful. That's why it's important for people, especially on the left, even, and no matter where you are actually on the political spectrum, it's important for you to go out there, make your voice heard. It's important to protest. It's important to call out your politicians, call out Amazon, call out these big businesses and big corporations who exploit people, who don't represent you, who represent the interests of big corporate America. Until the majority of Americans stand up and say, hey, we're not okay with this, and hey, we won't stand for this, nothing's really going to change.
I completely agree, and I am a big proponent of making your voice heard. Always, I think that one major difference, right, between like the Democratic Party, Republican Party, is that the Republican Party has realized that they can, they can kind of harness energy on the right in a way that like the Democratic Party is still kind of afraid of their own shadow. You know what I mean? They're waking up with night sweats about George McGovern for some reason. You know what I mean? And in reality, it's like the energy on the left, right, is much farther to the left than the Democratic Party, right, is at the elite level, and that is going to lead to. I mean, it's happened before, right? And what's either going to happen is that the Democratic Party is going to have to, bend a little bit to the left, or those people who feel like they, the whole like Bernie was cheated out of the nomination, I think is a little bit of a fraught argument. I think that there was an elite consolidation around Biden, helped by Obama, right? Like that doesn't even seem like a controversial take,
Yeah, no,
but
yeah.
Well, it's just going to lead to people who feel like, oh, it doesn't even matter, right? Like I can go make 2,000 calls for Bernie and go to South Carolina to knock on doors and everything, and Colin does it all. It's like, what's the point, And those people, if they feel like that, are going to end. I think there's a good chance that they end up disengaging and basically dropping out of politics, no matter how much they care about these issues, which I think is extremely dangerous and, is like Democrats basically like shooting themselves in the foot, right? Because those people could be the future of the party, but not if you, disregard them and say, oh no, like, we don't care,
Right, and that's been actually something I've noticed, especially from the Biden campaign. And Vice President Biden has always said that he's running to be America's candidate. He wants to be America's president. He's running to unify the country, bring everyone together. And he's done a good job at trying to do that as far as the moderates in this country and even, the more moderate Republicans. But he has not been able to do that with the majority of the left. And I think that it's concerning. It's quite concerning. When I see Joe Biden go out on his town halls, and he's done this a few times now, and he talks about socialism, which is an idea that's very popular amongst young people in this country, especially millennials. If you polling amongst millennials on socialism, majority of millennials, a more socialistic model for economics in this country. You'll have young people in this country identify as socialists. When you're running to be America's president, and you're going to town halls, and you're saying, I beat the socialist, I'm going to take care of the people that we're worried about, and you're kind of doing an us against them mentality, which is weird. It's very weird because you're at one turn saying, oh, Joe Biden's not that bad, you should vote for him, he's the only way you're going to get any of your policies across. But in the same breath, you're identifying all of these people who voted for people like Bernie Sanders, even Andrew Yang, and those like, you're saying, hey, we don't care about you, and we're going to be fighting you every step of the way. And that's not surprising. The Democratic establishment has been trying to fight off the threat of socialism and this whole movement of leftists within their party. But what's surprising is the lengths they're willing to go to alienate voters, knowing that these voters are likely going to disengage and not show up on election day. That's what I'm worried about. Like, I'm actually extremely worried about not just them disengaging from this election. I'm worried about them disengaging in politics in general, because because here's the reality: a lot of these people, they're young, they're in debt, They know that they're in a rigged economy that's not working for them. They can't find jobs. They're in the middle of a pandemic. Literally everything is working against them in our society, in our economy, in our politics. And they see no way of it getting better, and they're going to drop out and disengage at a very early age, and it's going to stick with them for a long time. And that is so dangerous to me, because this is a subset of a population that, people like Bernie Sanders have really brought in and got them to engage for the first time. And this is the experience you're leaving them with. This is how you're planning on engaging people in politics. The same party that says we want as many people to come out and vote as possible. This mentality of, Joe Biden going out there and attacking socialists and attacking socialism and kind of framing them as the enemy. There's ways to do it where you can be like, hey, okay, yes, I know you're, like, there are voters out there worried about socialism, right? I know that you're worried about socialism, but let me tell you this. What these people are seeking is just a better way forward for them, for the majority of the working class in this country, and we need to understand that, and we don't necessarily need to agree with that, but we need to take their ideas into account, just like we take your ideas into account. There's ways to be unifying. There's ways to do that. Even act like you're being unifying. You're still able to get more people engaged and even consider voting for you. To me, it just seems like just bad. I don't know whether it's bad consulting or bad advice from his campaign to be like, hey, socialism is the enemy. And you got 10 million people who voted for Bernie Sanders. You get another 3 million who voted for Elizabeth Warren. And then, maybe like a few 100,000, but still a lot of people were engaged with Andrew Yang. And like a lot of those people, like if you're looking for people who identify as socialists, they're within those ranks. So,
well, and it's weird too, right? Where they do this weird talking out of both sides of their mouth, where they say, we don't need the left, right? We can win without the left. We can win through the white suburbanites and moderate Republicans, right? But then also, if you're on the left and you don't vote for, like, that's a vote for Trump, right?
Right, and that's see. Let's just clear that up now, because I know you and I probably have similar opinions on this. The notion that a vote for anyone who is not Trump is a vote for Trump has always been so asinine to me. It doesn't make any sense. I think the argument people make is, oh, you're taking away votes for Biden, when that's not true, because a lot of people who vote third party, a lot of people who vote for Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian candidate, or most likely Howie Hawkins, who's the Green Party candidate, if they vote for them, they're probably not thinking about voting for Biden. Now, if we had ranked choice voting, you could argue that maybe some of that would be fixed, but we don't. Maine's the only state in the country that has ranked choice voting. I've never liked this kind of voter shaming or basically trying to shame voters into voting for your candidate. It just seems like an ineffective strategy, because if you say, hey, you're terrible if you don't vote for this person, how in the world is that going to get someone to see your point? How in the world is that going to get someone to want to vote for your candidate? Like, no matter who it is. It's the same thing of the basket of deplorables comment that I believe Hillary Clinton made in 2016, where she said all Trump supporters are a basket of deplorables. That's not unifying at all. That's not speaking to a message that's going to bring people together.
So, on the point of clearing up some misconceptions, I'd love to. I think a lot of this third party stuff, because up until 2000, right? Because I think on the left, in the Democratic Party, a lot of the third party vote shaming comes from the 2000 election, Nader and all that. Which, let's be clear, Nader is not the reason that Al Gore did not win. First of all, you could argue he did win, and the Supreme Court was basically like a judicial coup, right? Which I think is an argument with some merit. But people refuse to look at the Gore campaign and the mistakes that they made. Gore invested tons of money and resources into trying to win his home state of Tennessee, which he was never going to win. If he poured that money into instead Florida, right, which is the key state in that election, we might be looking at a very different outcome. Same is true of Hillary Clinton. They turned around buses, SEIU buses, headed for I think it was Wisconsin or Michigan, and sent them back to, I think, like Georgia or something.
North Carolina. There were buses going to Wisconsin.
Yeah, there were buses going to Wisconsin. That's an unforced self-own, you know? Yeah. And let me say this too. I think you're completely right. The people who vote for the Green Party, the people that I know that vote for the Green Party are never going to vote for Democrats. That's just the truth.
Yeah.
And if you look at places like, if you look at Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, right, which is most the key states that Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, the margin for Jill Stein in those states is not enough to make up for the Electoral College loss, right? If every Jill Stein voter in all three of those states voted for Hillary, she might have won with Michigan, she might have won Wisconsin, wouldn't have won Pennsylvania, and that still would not have been enough to put her over the top.
Right.
So the idea of blaming Jill Stein for especially when Gary Johnson, I mean, I don't know how he did in that election, but he was taking just as many Trump votes, I would wager that Jill Stein was taking. And again, they're not entitled to these votes. That's the bottom line. You have to win these people over.
You hit it right on the head, right there. Yep. You're not entitled to these votes. Yep.
And so that's why I think that. So we want to talk about third parties. This is one of the main things I want to talk about. I think that this whole idea of kicking the Green Party off the ballot, right, as the Dems have made a priority of doing in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin.
Yep.
I think it's totally misguided. I think that what's going to end up happening is that people who would turn out to vote for Howie Hawkins or whatever in this election, who would vote for him at the top of the ballot, but then vote for Democrats down ballot in these local races, are just not going to show up.
Yep.
Yep. And so I completely agree with this. I actually disagree with the line that's been floating around of like good for bad for democracy. It's not good for Democrats, but
terrible.
It's also bad for democracy.
It's not voter suppression, but it's the suppression of ideas. And I've always said that the political parties,
it's anti-democratic.
Yep. The political duopoly. It's we live in a country that has we have an economic oligarchy, but we also have an oligarchy of ideas. There's really only two approved ways to think. And if you are even out of line with that, they're going to make you seem out to be the victim, when in reality, it's the people who are running these campaigns who really should be held accountable. I'm not going to lie to you. Joe Biden's not my favorite candidate. He wasn't even my favorite candidate in the primary. Is he better than Donald Trump? Absolutely. A broom would be a better choice against Donald Trump if it was a one-on-one election. But here's the thing. A lot of people in this country know that it's not a one-on-one election. This is an election where you have multiple people on the ballot. You cannot blame someone who wants to vote based on ideas. If someone thinks that Howie Hawkins' ideas are better than Joe Biden's, then you can't blame them for voting the way they want. Because Howie Hawkins, he's been fighting for these ideas. Howie Hawkins is part of the reason they had a $15 minimum wage in New York, because he kind of pushed Cuomo on that. He authored the Green New Deal before AOC and Ed Markey and all of these people kind of latched on and grabbed it. He basically helped lift the Green Party out of obscurity. So him and even Jo Jorgensen, who I know a lot of people on the right, they love her for her memes, but they also love her for her ideas. But a lot of people are kind of shifting towards Jo Jorgensen. I think at the end of the day, more people on the right are gonna probably end up voting for Jo Jorgensen than.
Well, personally, I am a fan of the Green Party. I think that they, I think that their strategy could use some work. But personally, I actually for Gloria Lariva, who is to me the left candidate in this election. She's not on the ballot. She's only on the ballot in a few states and running write-in campaigns in several other states. In California, she ran on the Peace and Freedom Party ballot line. But she is the presidential nominee of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which is, I think a tremendous organization, and I applaud their work tremendously. They are also the victims of, unlike basically any party that's active in the United States today, they're the actual victim of political prisoner taking, right? Leonard Peltier is a Native activist who's been in prison basically his entire life under false pretenses. So in protesting the Elijah McClain shooting, PSL members were, they were in front of the entrance, kind of preventing, not really, but preventing the police officers inside from leaving. the district attorney there is charging them with kidnapping for each officer in the building. So they're being charged like 18 counts of kidnapping, these like life sentences if convicted. You know what I mean? It's you know, that to me is a mark of a party that is truly revolutionary and truly you know, out in the streets fighting for the people. I respect the Green Party. I am glad that they're on the ballot, especially nationwide. But you know, the Green Party is not out there doing that. You know, which I have to applaud.
Right. Just speaking to strategy real quick, I think a lot of these third parties, predominantly the Green and Libertarian Party, they kind of know the game that they're trying to play, or the game they need to play, because they know they're not going to win. Their goal is to make sure that they do whatever they can to try to get above this 5% threshold. And let me just explain to people who might not be familiar with that.
Sure.
In this country, in order to get public funding for your political party's election, you need to have had 5% in the last national election in states and nationally. In states, the percentage, I believe, varies, but nationally, if you get 5%, that opens up a lot more funding for you. And what that does is, for the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, right now, the way it works is when they're trying to run their own elections, they get no help from the state. They get no help from the government. They're only able to use the funds that they already have to kind of run their own elections. So that makes it hard for them to, you have to spend money on both running their elections in each state and at the same time, you know, supporting candidates down the ballot, trying to get their ideas across, messaging and so forth. And while, you know, the Democratic and Republican parties, they have public funding open because they always get 5% nationally. They always have that funding. They don't have to worry about paying for their own elections. They can always keep their focus on something else. And it's hard for parties like the Green Party, Libertarian Party, and others to really make up that ground. That's a huge hurdle that people don't really talk about. That and the mainstream media kind of blackout of these politicians is that those are the two biggest hurdles for third parties in this country. So getting that 5% threshold, I think, is key. And people like Howie Hawkins know that. He talks about this publicly. People like Joe Jorgensen even. Getting that 5% threshold, like, a lot of people don't understand what that means for these parties. That means that their ideas can survive, because the thing you hear from, just to bring it back to the entertainment industry, the thing you hear from people, actors or actresses like Alyssa Milano, for example, you know, vote blue no matter who. It seems like such a stupid concept to me. Yeah, just vote for this one party blindly, while not even looking up some of their ideas of the ideas of the individual candidates. That does not make sense to me, because you would ideally want to vote for people who represent you and represent the ideas that you believe in. And again, I don't want to seem like I'm railing against just the Democratic Party, because you have a lot of people in the Republican Party, but I'm trying to speak to, you know, people act like this and trying to make them better. Like, if you don't, like, just don't. So that just never made sense to me. Don't succumb to this idea of vote blue no matter who, or even like red no matter who. It just because what it does, it gives these parties, it gives the political duopoly, the ideological oligarchy, it legitimizes a lot of their bad policies, and it justifies their bad decisions and candidates. So the politicians, it's up to them to make up the ground. It's not up to people. That's a huge disconnect you see with a lot of people. A lot of people are like, oh, you're not voting for Trump? Oh, you're a socialist. Or if you're not voting for Biden, oh, you support Trump. And when neither of those scenarios are probably true. A lot of those people are just saying, hey, I just want to be heard. I don't think either party is good for America. I don't think either party is working towards the betterment of the American people and the working class. I want better. I agree with this person. And that's something that I think we kind of need to, you know, destigmatize. This whole, every election, it seems, is the most important election in our lifetime.
Of course, and always.
Every single time. You can argue it might be true this time, but it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf after a while, right? It's like you hype it up every time, and that's the justification for putting these parties down every time. And then the one time you really need people to come together, you really need people to defeat this one common enemy that is Donald Trump. People aren't buying it. People have been alienated. People have been disgruntled with the way that you're running things, and it just needs to change. I'm gonna be honest. I hope that Donald Trump is not in office come January. I really do, because he's the biggest threat to American democracy, in my opinion, since the Civil War. That's legitimately how far I think he's gone, and another 4 years could actually destroy this country, because But I think people really need to wake up after this election, especially people who they should be holding accountable aren't voters. It's politicians. It's people who are seeking their elected offices.
Let me add a few points here. So to the 5% threshold, I completely agree. That is the number one goal for any third party in this country. Obviously, for the national parties like PSL functions differently. They only run in certain states. They're also a membership driven party as opposed to like an electoral party, right? It's much more about action and things like that. Also, like you look at something like the New York Working Families Party, right, which is basically a state level party. The Working Families Party has some affiliate parties as well. With the way the New York election system works, it's like fusion voting. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party in New York is trying to basically destroy the Working Families Party, and the only recourse that they have is by nominating Biden on their ballot line and trying to get people to vote for Biden as their working candidate. But to the 5% threshold point, that is indeed the threshold for federal funding. It also used to be the threshold for getting into the presidential debates. And after Nader, that's when they upped it to 15%,
right? Which
is basically impossible for any third party. If you're, maybe once you cross the 5% and get federal funding and blah blah blah, right? But you really anyone getting 15%. It's happened twice in the last 100 years with the Bull Moose, Teddy Roosevelt and Perot.
And even Perot, that was after Perot spent hundreds of millions of dollars of his own money.
Right? So it's like it's not a real. That's an artificially high threshold, right?
100%.
They just don't want people hearing those debates. If you look at the debates in any other country, Canada doesn't really have a tradition of prime ministerial debates, but they had one most recently in the most recent election, and they had the Liberals, they had the Conservative Party, they had the New Democratic Party, which is more of a left party, they had the Greens, right? Bloc Québécois, the Québécois Nationalist Party, and they're all in the debate, and it's like it's important that people hear the range of ideas, because then you can't, like, if you're the Democratic Party, you can't just claim like, oh, we're the most left party, right? Like we're the ones who are going to actually do anything. It's right. Like, no, you actually give people that choice.
Right.
And I wanted to say too, it's like I'm obviously not a libertarian, I'm not on the right, but I think it is remarkable how much the Libertarian Party has established itself, right? I saw a poll recently. You might have seen this. It was fascinating to me. I'd never seen something like this before. It was a Libertarian Party internal poll in Arkansas, in the Arkansas Senate race. And it showed the Libertarian candidate, Harrington, I think his name is, 38 to Tom Cotton's 49. It was within spitting distance.
I heard about this. Yes, I have heard about this.
So I think that's absolutely remarkable. And I think that it is a bellwether, right? I think that if you're starting to see third-party state-level challenges that are actually real, right? And it's hard to say. It's a Libertarian Party internal poll. Who knows? But if that, if he wins double digits, right? Especially within the 20s or 30s, right? That is a showing that is not going away. And I think the same thing is going to start to happen on the Democratic states as well.
Right, and that speaks to this idea. It's not just the presidential election here. Like people always like to focus on the presidential election. It's also the down ballot candidates. People forget Green Party, Libertarian Party, Socialist Liberation Party, right?
PSL.
The PSL. They have down ballot candidates as well. These third parties are running people at all levels of government, whether it's state, local, federal, etc. So I think people, like always, they try to focus too much on the bigger picture, or they try to focus too much on the presidential election. They forget the bigger picture. And again, something you said really made me think. It speaks to this idea of like the Democratic Party or Republican parties saying, oh, there's really no other way to go. When they say that they don't want the Green Party or the Libertarian Party on the ballot, when they do actively go out and try to stop them from getting on the ballot in states, then the question becomes, what are you scared of?
Exactly.
What are you really scared of? And you know what the answer is? They're realizing that their ideas aren't that good. The ideas that they're putting forward are not appealing to a broader base of America. And in order to stop these people from being legitimized, and by these people I mean third parties, they're going out of their way to stop them from getting on the ballot. They're going out of their way to just slandering their candidates. Like people. I saw on again, Twitter is a very Twitter is a toxic place, but if you go on Twitter and you just look up Howie Hawkins, and a lot of the way that you'll see people speak about him, who aren't traditional leftists, who are more mainstream in the mainstream Democratic Party. They talk about him. He's a communist. He's like Carl. He's like Stalin. It's this outrageous stuff. When he's literally just a guy. He's just a guy who wants to have an environmental Green New Deal. It's this slanderous kind of stuff that makes people really hate politics because they see past that stuff. Like even when Trump's out there, when I see YouTube ads of Trump calling Joe Biden a socialist, anyone who actually believes that Joe Biden's a socialist, they've already made up their mind a long time ago who they're going to vote for. And because even moderates will see that and they'll say, okay, that's just not true.
It's silly. It's on its face.
It's silly. And I've also said it's an insult to socialists to call Joe Biden a socialist.
Absolutely.
He's not.
Don't get me in with him.
That's your big worry about voting against Biden or voting for Biden. That's your big worry. Yeah, don't be worried. He's not a socialist. He's probably, if he gets elected, he's going to probably actively fight a lot of the left wing of the Democratic Party actively every day.
Absolutely.
And that's something I think we have to prepare for. And that's actually something I want to talk to you about. Like, to put a bow on everything. Let's just say, a few months from now, because we're both part of the progressive leftist part of the Democratic Party. Let's say a few months from now, Joe Biden is elected. A lot of people have kind of this weird idea in their head that it's going to be kumbaya, it's going to be okay, everything's going to be great when Joe Biden's elected. When the reality is, the progressives, the left, they got a lot of work to do now. Like, even then. Because this election is kind of a decision of, okay, we know we're going to have to fight no matter who's in office. Because Joe Biden does not want to shift the Democratic Party left. Donald Trump does not want to shift the country left at all. He doesn't want to endorse any of those policies. There's no way of getting those across, right? So I think the question for a lot of progressives is, how do we take action following the results of this election, after everything's settled, obviously? If Joe Biden's the president, what's the next move after that?
So I think that, honestly, if you have a historical lens, right, the Biden campaign and a Biden victory, which I hope for, right? I voted for Gloria in California, right? There's no chance that that's going to swing the state to Trump or anything. You know what I mean? If you live in a swing state, I still, no matter how left you are, I at the end of the day, do think you should hold your nose and vote for Biden. All of that said, if you look at campaigns that basically are what Biden's campaign is, right? At the core message of return to normalcy, right? That's the Warren G. Harding message. Harding, was the return to normalcy candidate. Another character who kind of fits that historical mold is Hindenburg, right? The last president of Germany, chancellor of Germany before Hitler took power. These things don't bode well, right? I think that America is on a collision course with destiny, right? I think that we're in many ways a declining power and still extremely powerful, and we're kind of struggling to recognize that we don't hold the same position in the world that we used to. We're not by any means the largest country in the world anymore. China will overtake us economically, I believe. And at that point, right, when the U.S. is no longer the largest or most economically profitable country in the world, what are we, right? And the answer is the biggest military. And that poses massive problems, because if the U.S. then tries to basically reassert itself militarily when the world is kind of moving on from the U.S., from the world order with the U.S. at the center of it. I think that, that is the kind of thing that leads to world wars and such. So frankly, I think that what we need is an off-ramp to empire and from empire. And I don't believe that Joe Biden is really capable of doing that or really interested in doing that, but it's happening nonetheless. And so I believe that in terms of I believe that we need to, hopefully, right, the conversation on the left, within the Democratic Party, there's left inside and outside the Democratic Party. But within the Democratic Party, I think there needs to be a real conversation about, okay, we've beaten Trump, now what? And I don't really think that they are interested in having that conversation, but it's going to have to happen one way or another. And basically, I think that a lot of these same protest movements are going to be just as relevant under Biden administration. Like saying shoot him in the leg, right, is not a solution to the Black Lives Matter issue, right?
Not at all.
Saying nothing will fundamentally change is not an answer to the economic issue. And so these things will. I'm very scared, right, that we get like a 4 years of Biden, which basically amounts to not much, and then getting like a Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley 2024, who is a much more like adept fascist, right? And so, I believe at every turn the left has to be exerting as much pressure as possible, and who knows how much pressure that can actually be under the Biden administration, but they have to be going all out every day because we're rapidly approaching a national crisis, international crisis, and of course an existential crisis in climate change.
And I think it's important to note that for any leftists out there who are listening, or it's important for anyone who votes for Biden who's on the left to say that even though the vote's going to Biden, it's not an endorsement of his policies. It's not an endorsement of anything he really stands for, other than the fact that he's the only candidate with the money, the influence, the power to beat Donald Trump. It's important to say that. And in the same breath, it's important to say that your vote is not giving Joe Biden a mandate to run the country in the way that he wants. Your vote is strictly a means to an end. Whatever one is right, I'll fix it in post. But the policies that a Joe Biden administration would bring, or the lack of change, there's going to have to be some sort of discussion. I think you're right. After this election, there needs to be very strong discussion. And I think problems are going to arise out of that, because the Democratic mainstream is kind of already in the past, and even right now, they've showed that they don't want to have that discussion. They showed in the primaries they really didn't want to have that discussion, because a lot of the mainstream candidates, the only thing that they were running on, Joe Biden, the only thing, it's weird. You would think that someone like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or one of those people would run on like clout and actually capture the nomination somehow in that way, or even Kamala Harris. It's weird. Joe Biden had almost no cool clout. It just seemed to be all 100% political DC clout that kind of elevated him to the nomination. It was like a lot of this, a lot of this insider dealing like we talked about. But yeah, that's the bigger thing. I think there needs to be a conversation, and my fear is that you'll have a lot of Biden voters, you'll have a lot of people in the mainstream of the Democratic Party saying they don't want to have that conversation, that, okay, yeah, Joe Biden's our president now, we need to follow him, when that's just fundamentally not the reason he got elected.
Absolutely. And I wanted to add to an earlier point about non-voters. Like, I think there's very disingenuous narrative about, the privilege of non-voters, and how, like, it's completely ridiculous. If you look at the actual demographics of non-voting, the people who vote are rich white people. You know what I mean? The people who don't vote are overwhelmingly non-white people, especially poor people, right? Like the poorer you are, the less likely you are to vote. And that, I think factors into the Biden equation a lot, because, Biden, right, like Bernie, if he had been the nominee, like the entire campaign apparatus would be devoted to mobilizing those people and getting them out to vote. The Biden campaign is like, ads in suburbs,
I've always said if Mike Bloomberg wasn't so fully he would have spent all his money on Texas and just flipped it blue, because he could have done that. Same thing with Arizona. He just would have put all his money in those two states, and the Democrats wouldn't even have to worry about this election.
I absolutely agree. And, look, the Biden campaign has won in surprising ways before. It might be enough to get them over the finish line. They're like double digits ahead right now. Right?
I think the polling right now, it just, ever since the debates and Donald Trump catching COVID, the polling has just been insurmountably for Biden. It's just he's up so much, even in just not just in national polling, but in polling in key states. And this is like even more than where Hillary was at this point in the election. This is like
a lot more.
This is actually very powerful.
I also think that, again, it goes to this idea that I earlier about Democrats being afraid of their own shadow. Like, I think you have to give people some credit, right? Like they see how COVID is ravaging their communities. They see the deaths. They see the economic devastation, right? Like, what, they're just gonna let off Trump with a free pass for some reason? It doesn't make sense, I think that any candidate would be doing extremely well against an incumbent president who's just unpopular with these successive crises happening at the same time. People also, there's a lot of revisionist history about 2016 too. It's like people totally forget about the Comey letter and things like this that were, terrible October surprises for Hillary, right?
Yeah.
That was really the only thing that, like, she briefly had a moment like this where she was like really ahead when the Access Hollywood tape came, and then the Comey letter totally ended that right before the election. So, we'll see if something, but it honestly doesn't seem like they have anything like that on Biden, and he just doesn't have the same unfavorables going into the election that she did. I mean, I was a fan of Hillary, really. I prefer her to Joe Biden. I mean, she also just on a political level, right? The left had really a lot of leverage in the DNC at that time after the primaries. And, we're able to pressure her into taking more progressive positions on a lot of things.
Significant more leverage than they have right now.
Yes, and we're able to turn that into an actual very extremely progressive platform and have her certain things that Joe Biden just doesn't and won't, and I think it's a shame.
The weirdest thing, though, about the Biden campaign is the most progressive policy for me that Joe Biden is touting is free public colleges. College is a very progressive platform to run on. It's a very progressive issue, but you're not hearing it out of the mouths of Joe Biden, or you heard it out of Kamala Harris, but you don't hear these progressive policies that the campaign has made. These significant changes to his very milquetoast policies he was running on in the primaries. You don't see that. You don't see these really being brought to the forefront. And I think if you told progressives, if Joe Biden just held a town hall or a virtual town hall or some sort of event explaining these policies, talking about them to everyone, I think that would, actually help him with a lot of progressives and leftists, because they would kind of see, okay, our work was not for nothing. We're getting $10,000 wiped off of our student loans. We're getting free public colleges. Like, things are happening. Things are moving forward. It's not the whole nothing will fundamentally change. Things are like free public colleges is fundamental change. But what worries me is the fact that he's not talking about it. And because he's not getting that message out there. They're doing a very bad job of getting their message out there. And when it's an easy slam dunk, you could just say that and you could get that message across, but they're not doing it.
Absolutely. There's a lot of progressive policy that he could have easily signed. I mean, Kamala Harris supported $2,000 a month retroactive to March for UBI, which I think, how could any American not want? And
God bless Andrew Yang.
Medicare for all, right? We're in the middle of a health crisis. There's absolutely safe for everyone, right? If you could get medical treatment, even if you can't afford it, right? But that's just not on the table with Joe Biden, which is such a tragedy, both for the lives of lost and also just going forward, we're permanently putting ourselves at a disadvantage in that way. So foolish.
Francesco, it has been a pleasure having you on, my friend. Is there any cause you want to shout out? Where can the people find you? Let them know.
Follow at Socialist Batman. That's where I am most active, and that's it.
Yep, at Socialist Batman on Twitter, guys. Francesco, thank you so much. Gonna have you on again to talk about things, hopefully after the election. Hopefully continue our conversation on, the leftists and the progressive movement, and where we go, how we move forward following this election. So again, thank you for coming on. Thank you guys for listening. Be sure to tune in next time as we talk to another guest about the developments of this election and how the potential red mirage and Trump not accepting the results of the election are going to affect our country moving forward. So be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, I'm Omer Qureshi. This has been Omer 2020.